Thank you all for joining today. Sure appreciate it. My name is Josh Dorrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. It has been a really big year. I started this role at the beginning of February. And since that time, it's been pretty darn busy. We've had a lot going on at the Business Council. Starting about March 13th, I believe it was, we had some changes in our situation throughout the state and maybe throughout the world that have precipitated us to do a lot more work than normal. We at the Business Council will have given out about $500 million to businesses across the state in 7 different aid programs. All the while, we had a lot of other things happen, like our normal jobs, some organizational changes, and some pretty dramatic budget cuts. So it's been a pretty busy and quite frankly, a crazy year. One of the attendees, Dan Bleak, was just asking where I was because Dan and I would see each other at the gym almost every day. And well, that time slot is no longer available for me. And really, I have nobody to blame but myself. One, I took the job, but two, during the interview, the final interview that we had for this role, one of the board members asked me a question. She said, "Josh, you've never been in government before. Do you think you can handle the pace of government?" And, ignorance is bliss, but ignorance also causes you to put your foot in your mouth once in a while. So I sarcastically laughed and gave her a smart aleck answer like, speed of government? I've been in business my whole life and I work at the speed of business. So I kind of deserve it. And I just want to apologize to all of you for being collateral damage in my karma. And I also like to apologize to Megan if she happens to be on this call and say sorry for being so sarcastic with that answer. But when Mandy asked me to speak today, I was really flattered, and I was mostly happy to do so because of the title. And I'm gonna start sharing my screen here and show you what the original title was. And the original title was supposed to be A Crisis on Day One, and I was going to make it a story about lemonade. Because one, everybody likes lemonade, but it turns out that it wasn't actually a crisis on day one. It really was a crisis on day 39 is when that occurred. And so she said, I'd like you to come in and talk a little bit about about your experiences over the course of this year due to COVID-19. And I was happy to do so, but I don't really want to focus on COVID-19. In fact, I hope that that's the last time I say that. In fact, I think that really what the title of this should be is the leadership opportunity of a lifetime on day 39. And really what it is a story of transformation. I guess I've always been really, really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. With most of my previous roles, I stepped into them when times weren't ideal, when most people would agree that they wouldn't have taken that role. And for me, I kind of see it in the exact opposite way. In all of those times when I've had challenges, I've grown the most, and it's been the most impactful on my career. I took this role to really make a difference in a state that we all love. And somebody asked me one time what it was like to be in this position during this time. And I said, really leaders don't wish for a crisis, but we're really glad to be in a position to make a difference when they happen. And I think that's really critical for all of us. And so what I'd like to do today is show 10 observations of leadership and transformation in a crisis. Number one, the first thing you need in any crisis is a great team. I don't think I'm alone here based on the demographics of the audience that the 95-96 Bulls team is indisputably the best basketball team ever. But really, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the team at the Wyoming Business Council. And that group got together and has created just an incredible amount of work, incredible amount of good and benefit for our state in a very short amount of time. And really what I want you to take a look at here is less about the number of people or who they are. Those are important. But what I want you to think about is under every one of their names is a title. And it turns out that in a crisis, those titles don't matter. In a crisis, you might find that you have people that have talents that have nothing to do with their titles. And that's really a leader's responsibility, is to understand that and to try to find those talents and bring those out, because in a crisis, they can be incredibly important. I'd also like to say that this team is great on many, many levels. But the next 9 observations that I'm going to make didn't really come from me. Now, I saw them, but they came from the team. When Mandy asked me to do this speech, I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. And so I reached out to the team and I said, I'd like everyone to contribute as much as possible. I'd like you to share the things that you learned along the way in the last 8 months or so, and share and allow me to share them with Leadership Wyoming. And so as we go through these, realize that I definitely don't exhibit all of these, but folks in my team do. So one of the things that we tend to do as leaders and as organizations is we tend to see challenges ahead and think about ways to go around them. And I thought this was a fantastic metaphor that in a crisis especially, but maybe even in real life, regular life, we shouldn't be afraid to drive through the mud puddles, because it turns out that it might actually be some fun, and getting dirty isn't the end of the world. And what I mean by that is that, especially in a government entity, I can tell you that this is one of the things I have learned, is that we tend to overthink things because there are so many different constituent groups. There are so many different impacts that you can make that you get almost paralyzed. And what I never wanted to do was just do analysis and that whole paralysis by analysis. And so what we have done is had the confidence to take issues head on, things that maybe in the past we wouldn't have, but we're doing it now because, one, we have to. And what we're finding is that the world didn't end. The puddle wasn't the bottom. It was actually something that we could drive through and have fun and learn from. The next thing that's important is to understand and really truly know your purpose as an organization and as an individual. That is something that, again, the Business Council is really, we understand our purpose. We know that our job is to help businesses. And whenever we were encountering really tough decisions or prioritizations, and believe me, when you are tasked with providing $500 million to the state, there are competing interests. There are folks from all over the place telling you what you ought to do and how you ought to do it. And what we decided is that early on, we were always going to go back to this simple question whenever we were challenged. Are we helping businesses buy time and build resilience? If our programs were doing that, if our actions were doing that, we were doing the right thing and we could justify it. If it wasn't, if it was for some other reason, we really had to think hard and maybe not do that. Now, having your purpose is great, but you do have to actually make decisions. And I'm sure we're all familiar with at least one line of Robert Frost's poem. And we had to make choices. We had to make choices. And for those of us who are a little bit nerdy in the group, what this means in a crisis, and really in any time, there are way more unknowns than there are equations. And that means that you don't get a definite answer. In fact, the other thing is you're never going to make everybody happy, especially in government work. You're just not. And you kind of have to wrap your mind around that. But what's really empowering about that is, again, you go back to your purpose. You realize that you can't make a perfect decision, and you make the best decision you can. And guess what? You will make some bad ones. But the key is to keep moving forward. I want to spend a little time on this one. The next observation has to do with sticking to processes that work. Now, in our typical course of business, the Business Council is all about different things. Services, whether that be for existing businesses, whether that be for entrepreneurs, whether that be for agriculture, whether that be for business recruitment. That's one section. Another part of our business is all about grants and loans and investments. And we kind of have people, like all organizations, siloed, right? We have strategy, we have communications, and they're all kind of siloed. And when we first started this, and just to give you a little background, we first started this whole process in May when the legislature came together and they put forth 3 different business relief programs totaling $325 million. And they gave the Business Council the opportunity to execute those programs. And when we first started reading the legislation and we first started thinking about them, folks in the investment group were like, well, looks like a few of us are going to spend our summer working on all of these grants and loans and things like that. Well, it turns out that that wouldn't have been enough. In fact, if a few people were only working on it, we would still be on the first program. Instead, what we realized is that we had to put a structure in place that would allow us to do this work in a very short time frame with very little resources and with a lot of pressure. Because at the end of this, remember, the businesses that are out there are the ones struggling. The businesses that are the ones that were either impacted by health orders or impacted by lower tourism or impacted by their employees. And we needed to help them. And so knowing all of those things, we realized that we had to put a structure in place that allowed us to set up different domains and work on a frequency and a time schedule that was unlike what we had worked on in the past. And what we found is that that was at first very, very difficult for folks because we are a team or a group of people who are individual contributors. Most of the time we take the ball and finish the entire task on our own. But in this case, we couldn't do that. It was just too big of a project. So we set out 5 different domains covering all of the areas that we needed to. In those domains, we had people from multiple teams. So they were cross-functional teams. They were not, I mentioned I would have some buzzwords. There are a few. They were not all from one team. We wanted that diversity of thought. We really wanted people to be looking at all of the angles. And we also knew that we couldn't just have all of these teams thinking about all of the problems. So we set a structure in place that said, if you are on the process team, you only care about the process. If you are on the communication team, you care about communication. Now you might have to work with other groups, but don't think about and worry about what other groups are doing. To do that, you have to have one person who manages all of that. And we have had a person who's worked basically time and a half, if not double time, on just managing all of those groups. Now, those of you who are familiar with Agile might think of that person as a Scrum Master, but essentially it's a project manager who does nothing but coordinate, help teams collaborate, and make sure that they're getting their things done from day to day. Now, I'm spending a lot of time on this topic because that structure was incredibly important to get set up, but it has taken an inordinate amount of care and feeding to keep it going over the last 8 months. And so as we did that, we became really pretty hardcore about sticking to the process. And we wanted to make sure that we did that because for a couple reasons. One, you have to also have the courage to stop those behaviors that don't help. And one of those big behaviors is freelancing. It's what we call freelancing. It's the thing that when one person is just going to solve all the problems and come in and take care of everything, unbeknownst to the group, or maybe even tell them later. But that freelancing had to stop. And I'll admit to you, I was probably the chief freelance officer in addition to being the CEO a lot of times. And that structure was in place for a reason. And it was especially important for everybody to understand that. It's also important to understand that when you have a process that's working, you can't stop care and feeding of that process. And so for us, after we had some initial success with that first program, it went from June 2nd until the beginning of July, I believe July 8th or 9th. And it was a resounding success. People got their money quickly. The process was easy for them. There were no technical glitches, smooth as could be. And our team celebrated. We were excited. We thought, this is awesome. This is easy. We could do this again, no problem. Well, we had to do it again. We thought at that time 2 more times. It turns out it's been 5 more times. But we had to do it again. And there was this real urgency to go back to the way we always did things, to begin freelancing again, to forget what we had just used to succeed. And one of the things as leaders we have to be really, really cautious about is that change in our people and our processes don't happen with just one instance. People don't immediately hear a talk or go through a process and think, oh, this is the way I'm going to do it from now on. It takes time. And it takes continual effort by leadership to come in and say, this is how we're going to do things. We are going to have discipline to the process. And we're going to nip those things that don't help us in the bud immediately. Now, that's ongoing. As I mentioned, we've done this many times now in the last 8 months. And we are going to continue to use this process, and we're going to continue to hone it. And we're going to continue to make sure folks like me don't circumvent the process. Now that can be really hard, especially when you have very powerful people, not me, much more powerful than I, asking for you to break the process so that you can make things happen faster or happen in a different way. And I can tell you that's happening today. It happened at the beginning, it's happening today. And having that discipline to say, I totally understand you. I understand where you're coming from. However, what we've found is that if we don't follow this process, it will actually be worse down the line. And I think having that structure in your organizations and within even your communities is really, really important. This next one is, we've got 4 different sayings that are pretty prevalent within the Business Council. We decided early on that during this crisis, a lot of things were being thrown at us. A lot of challenges were being presented to individuals as well as our organization. And let's all be frank with the topic that we're talking about today and having it be good riddance to 2020. We've all seen the effects of the crisis. And one of the things that we decided early on is that we were going to go into every meeting in a calm and hopeful way. We were always going to focus on how do we bring calm into a meeting with other agencies? How do we bring calm into a conversation with other businesses that we might be helping, who are wondering if they're going to be able to keep their doors open? How do we bring that hope to them? We also had another saying called slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And if you ever played infield in baseball, you know that if you're good at being deliberate and slow with your actions, you'll throw more people out. And if you're hurried and frantic, bad stuff happens. Those 2 things have really helped us a lot. But these next 2 things, not only in a crisis, but I think moving forward, will be extremely powerful for us. The first one is, that's outside my boat. Now, some of you might be wondering, who has time to go kayaking at this time? Well, I don't. Really, few of us probably do. It's not really about the kayak. It's really about focusing on things that you can control. And where this comes from is in the '96 Olympics, there was a reporter who was asked to cover the Olympics, and he was really excited until he found out that he was going to cover kayaking. He didn't even know that that was a sport in the Olympics, and he was going to get to cover it. Well, he started to go around and talk to all of the people that were in that were kayaking that day and talk to them about, well, what happens if your paddle breaks, or what happens if the wind shifts, or what happens if, and it was all these things that were outside their boat. And to a competitor, they all said the same thing. They all said, that's outside my boat. I can't control what's outside my boat. I can only control what's inside my boat. And so one of the things that, again, in an agency, a state agency, where you are getting bombarded with questions and ideas and thoughts and problems and all of those things, especially during a crisis, one of the things that you have to be able to is focus on what's inside your boat and ignore things that are outside your boat. And this saying is probably said more than anything throughout the halls of Business Council or throughout the meetings in Zoom. We hear this all the time. And what it has helped us do is focus on what we can control. And again, at a time like this, it's incredibly important, but normally it's very important as well. And so that's outside my boat has been a bit of a rallying cry. We used it today in a meeting. We will continue to use it. Another thing that is also really important is this question: what problem are we solving? So again, this happens when everybody's working on a problem, something new comes in, people jump to, they want to be helpful, they want to make a difference, and they start by just attacking the problem. But a lot of times it's not very well stated. So we always ask that at first, but we also repeat it throughout the process until we're done. Because it turns out that as people begin to take input, as people begin to think about the problem, they come up with all these edge cases. They come up with ideas that maybe don't make a difference, but they're really attractive and exciting to tackle. And so what we do as leaders is we come in and say, well, wait a second, what problem are we solving? Let's make the problem statement right now. And by articulating the problem statement, we're able to focus back on what's really going to make a difference. And as the old saying goes, a well-stated problem is half solved. That helps us all the time. So as leaders, we need to remember to come back in and readjust and ask our teams, what problem are we solving? I think we've all been in this situation where we get our heads down. We're working on a problem so much that we don't realize that there's a whole lot of other things going on in the world, right? And we need to pop out and really kind of say, wait a second, what's going on? What's going on for us? It was what's going on in other states. What's going on with businesses in these areas? At the very beginning, we had a lot of messaging going out in one particular medium, a lot of social media. And what we found is it wasn't reaching a lot of the customers and a lot of the businesses that we needed to reach. And so by sort of taking a look around and looking at how people consume media and how people might know about these programs, we made an adjustment. And we began to use radio programs to reach out to a lot of businesses that we couldn't have reached otherwise. This also helps when you are working with a lot of mentors. And now we are really lucky to have the board that we have because they're very engaged, they're very helpful, and they're well connected. And one of the things that we did early on, and we've done since I started, probably so they could babysit me a little bit, but it's been really helpful. But we meet every week with the executive leadership team and talk with them about problems and look at it from different perspectives. I also have a call every morning, or every Tuesday morning, excuse me, with the chairman of our board. And he and I talk about a number of topics that don't necessarily have to do with the day-to-day that we all might face. And popping out and thinking about those things has really made a big difference because it can help you solve problems. It can allow other people to help you solve problems. And it can show you what the problem is, maybe in a different light than you're used to. Now, it's really, really hard because the demands of the day are challenging. I was talking with Amy Grenfell, who's a classmate this year and also in this call, and she said, I was looking at my calendar and tomorrow I have 11 meetings in the afternoon. And you think to yourself, how are you supposed to take time to pull in a mentor? How are you supposed to take time and go out and do a little independent research? And so when you are in these situations where you're incredibly busy and there are demands at all times, you've got to find a way to make sure to carve out some time to think about the problem, maybe abstract it just a little bit, but work with your mentors, work with other team members, and try to find a little time to take a break from the demands of the day. Now, the next three topics I have to cover. It's whenever you're doing something about leadership, you have to cover these three items. They're pretty cheesy, but they're important. And hopefully what I'll be able to do is talk to you about them in a way that maybe is a little different than you've heard before. Of course, I'm talking about empowerment, attitude, and culture. Now, turns out the reason those are always talked about is because they're really, really important. And maybe we can talk about them in a way that changes the game a bit. Now, this one's all about empowerment. And one of the things that you want to think about every day is making sure that you trust your team. It turns out that the folks in the weeds, they know what's going on in the weeds. We want to help them see the bigger picture, of course, but you've got to trust what they're saying and you've got to allow them to take calculated risks. Now, I didn't say take risks. I said calculated risks. And we calculate those as a team. We think about ways that we can hedge, ways that we can understand the risks that might be there so that we can make a decision and move forward knowing what might happen and be aware of it. We also need to make sure that we allow people, and you could say it like this, make mistakes, or learn lessons. I think as leaders, sometimes we see a path, not knowing maybe all the details, which is good, but we see a path and we become prescriptive. We go in and we say, you've got to do it this way. We don't believe what you're saying. We think it's like this. Go forth. And I think that can happen from time to time. And in some cases it works, but in the long run, it doesn't really, because what we're really trying to develop is a strong team of people who can contribute at a level that they didn't yesterday. And we have to remember one other thing about this. When it comes to empowerment, remember that all of the things that we do are training for the next event. And so I don't know if you've ever followed motocross and freestyle things like this, where they're flying through the air and they're taking these crazy risks. Well, they don't do that all the time. They don't learn new tricks at the event. They learn them in a big foam pad, a big foam pit that allows them to bail safely or try new tricks out. And I think that's one of the things that as leaders, we need to provide. We need to provide that foam pit that allows them to try something a little bit crazy. And if they crash and burn, it's maybe not the end of the world, and they'll get better from it. They'll learn how to do it. But if we never let them and never trust them and never let them really learn those lessons, the organization becomes completely dependent upon us. And frankly, I would almost guarantee that no organization's leader is as smart as the collective or as smart as the individuals that they have. And that's a completely separate topic on hiring. But I would advocate that you always want to get smarter people than you and trust them. The other thing is that when we talk about attitude, and of course we could throw out some Winston Churchill quotes, or we could talk about attitude as everything, and those aren't wrong. But I think what we're really talking about is, how do we encourage a great team attitude? How do we develop a way for people to be resilient in the face of challenges? And what we've done over the last few months, and this is something that we will always do, can't see it any other way, is to have conversations about the challenges that we have, open, honestly, and really not be afraid of those difficult conversations. In fact, we should encourage those difficult conversations, because that's where people's attitudes are shaped. It's not about being happy all the time. It's not about bouncing around and having enthusiasm. It's about grinding challenges out. And it's about working together in an open, honest way. And when you do that, when you say, we don't know what's going to happen, this could end poorly, we see a path that may not work out that way, people are much more likely to work hard for you. People are much more likely to buy in. People are much more likely to bring their own resilience to the table. Now, I'm not saying that we haven't had plenty of inspirational talks. I'm not saying that we don't work on attitude almost every single day, because we do. But I think the way that we do it is what's important. And it's the way that we encourage that resilient attitude that is important. The last topic is about culture. And as leaders, we have and we can create the biggest impact on culture of any other person. And I do believe that it's the way we behave. Now, we have to say things, there's no doubt, but people are watching our actions. And I guess I look at when somebody said, well, how do we describe culture? How do we show culture? You know, I looked at it and I thought about culture, and we had a really good discussion this morning about culture between me and a few people I really trust, and they're much smarter than I. And it was hard to grasp and hard to describe. But I think culture is the way we do things. And culture is really kind of the organizational norms or comfort zone that we have created. And we create that culture, whether we know it or not, whether we should be doing it deliberately, but we create that culture by the people we hire, the work we allow them to do, the way we do our work, the way we interact with one another. And so those cultural norms affect the way we are able to perform dramatically. And I think one of the things that we've started to do is look at some of the cultural norms that we have and start to change those. And we used this opportunity, deliberately used this opportunity to change some of the cultural norms that might have been sticking us in the past. And I just really want everybody to realize whenever you're doing a project, whenever you are interacting, you need to be deliberate about shaping the culture of your organization. Now, that may be a shift, that may be growing the box, that may be getting rid of some norms, but be deliberate about it and take advantage of these situations in order to do so. I know there are many, many cultural norms that have already been changed at the Business Council because of the work we're doing within the business relief programs. We are much more confident. We're not afraid that people might be mad. We take it, understand it, but we keep moving forward. If I could, I'd like to just take a moment and talk a little bit more about culture, not just within your organization, but maybe a little bit bigger, maybe the entire society. And I want you to think about two different movies. I want you to think about this movie. If you haven't seen it, WALL-E is a dystopian, futuristic movie about a little robot who's cleaning up the earth because all of the human inhabitants have left. And all of the human inhabitants have had everything given to them, and they've been served so much that they don't even have the ability to walk anymore. They've become soft, incredibly soft. So soft that they can't even walk, and they can't even really function without a computer telling it what to do. Now, I might be hinting that it's possible that our society has become a little soft, but I want you to contrast that with another movie, Saving Private Ryan. Now, not so much in that it's a war movie and that it's really challenging and a huge, just a great hardship as a soldier. I really want you to think about the society, the American society during that time. I want you to think about the hardships that folks went through during that time. They went through the Great Depression. They went through a world war. And then from 1950 to 1973, that group of people, that generation, created the greatest economic growth the world has ever seen. By any measure, that period of time was the golden age of capitalism. If you were to put on a spectrum WALL-E and Saving Private Ryan on the other side, and then think about our culture and our society today, where would we fit? I guess that's something that we need to think about, right? What was created in that period of time? Now, there are economic factors, and I'm sure economists and sociologists will have all sorts of different ways and reasons to justify that growth and that really impressive generation. However, I think it might be grit. I think it might be resilience. I think it might be that they dealt with hardships on a daily basis that many of us might end up in a fetal position in the corner over. And they became used to it. And they became tough. And they truly knew that they could succeed. Now, maybe, just maybe, we're back in that spot. Maybe what we have in front of us is really the leadership opportunity of a lifetime here in Wyoming. And it really is about our transformation. Maybe this is exactly what we needed. I guess we just maybe needed something to rally around. Give us our grit back and help us as we approach the next challenges, because guess what? They're not small. How do we as leaders continue to transform our organizations to increase the resilience so that we can address the challenges that we face and turn them into opportunities. At the Business Council, we know that the challenges are real and the opportunities are big. We are working extremely hard to create opportunities for the current Wyomingites and future generations. I, for one, and I know that the rest of my organization feels extremely passionate and bullish about our future in Wyoming. We've seen what can happen when people work together to solve a really big problem. And we know the rest of the country has been awakened to the magic that is Wyoming. I heard this the other day that you should never waste a crisis. And I guess as leaders, that's my challenge to you. What changes have been inspired and facilitated by our situation? How will you shape your culture to be successful and resilient? But I also want you to ponder this. Think about those changes. Did we really need the crisis to make them? Or could we have inspired and facilitated those big changes in normal times? Well, again, thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about the fun we've been having here at the Business Council. And I really do mean that it has been a lot of fun. We've got a great team. We've got some big opportunities and challenges ahead of us. And we've had a lot of great help from across the state. So thanks for letting me come in and talk about it. Hopefully it'll help all of you. And please, if you don't already know me or haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, please do so. I'd love to talk with you more and get to know you.